Hi everyone, hope you're all well this lovely Tuesday evening. I want to welcome you all to our very first 25 Tuesdays with Way. It's an exciting new Instagram live series that we're going to be hosting over the next 25 weeks. You might be able to tell that I'm actually partly losing my voice. I've not been very well over the last week. So the really good news is I've also been able to rope in Emma, who is one of Way's ambassadors, and she's going to come and help me co-host this evening. But a bit about me, I'm Kate, I'm one of Way's members, and I'm also one of the volunteers, and I'm a trustee with the charity. And I'm really, really grateful to this amazing charity for many reasons, but primarily on a sort of personal and selfish level, how much it's helped me since the loss of my husband in 2017. He was only 40 when he died. I was only 35, and as I'm sure you can imagine, it's a huge shock, and some of you listening may have been through that exact experience, losing your loved one and finding that really difficult. And Way is a charity that's here for anybody who's lost their loved one, their partner, married, unmarried, inclusive of all, religion, sexual orientation, gender, race, anybody who is widowed before their 51st birthday and finds themselves in this unfortunate position. So we would talk about it being the club that nobody wants to join, but we're so grateful that it's here. I'm going to invite Emma in a second, and we're really excited that this evening we're going to be talking to Caroline, and Caroline is the reason that Way exists. She set this amazing charity up 25 years ago. It's why we're celebrating our 25-year anniversary, so I can't wait to talk to you about and talk to you with Caroline and Emma so that you can hear her inspirational story. I'm running six of these over the next 6 weeks, and hi Emma, thank you so much for coming on this evening.
Hi there.
Voice has come back a little bit, you'll be glad to know, but still struggling, so thank you for stepping in a little bit last minute. It's amazing to have you here. And as I said, Emma's one of our lovely ambassadors for the charity. She's also a member, and I'll be talking to her a little bit as well this evening. So just to quickly to tell you the faces of Way, the many faces behind Way, my little series over the next 6 weeks. I've got lots of exciting people lined up, including our current chair, Jo Sedley Burke, and she's going to be talking about losing her wife and how she became so passionate about supporting the charity to reach every member of eligible community. I'm going to be talking to another one of our ambassadors, a couple of the staff that work for Way as well, hearing a bit about behind the scenes and what it's like working for this charity full time. So yeah, it's quite a lot. So thanks again, Emma, for joining me. I'm going to attempt to add Caroline in now. Feel free to say a little bit about you while I'm trying to do this.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I'm so pleased you got a bit more of your voice. I've been really worried for you, bless you. So just let me know what you want me to do and how I can help. But so my husband died in 2016. He was in the Royal Marines, but he actually died at home of cancer. So fairly similar in that respect. He was 38 when he died, and our girls were 6 and 8 years old. I joined Way actually quite soon after he died, but bizarrely, and I think that actually it's okay if people feel like this, but at the time it wasn't right for me, and so I left, and then I rejoined in lockdown feeling like I'd literally lost. Hey, Caroline's here.
Hello.
Fabulous.
Hi, the only problem is I'm having difficulty hearing you.
Oh no. Have you got your headphones sorted, Caroline?
I've got my headphones in, but it's you're coming and going, which is a little bit annoying.
We'll try and speak loudly. I'm wondering if it's maybe because I'm a little bit quiet. I've just turned things up.
No, it isn't. Not you again.
We can hear you.
Right, I'm all right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I'm just going to have to hold the phone the whole time like this, which is going to make...
Well, you just cut out then slightly, Caroline. I think it's unfortunately Caroline's having to use her headphones, so I think it might be a slightly dodgy connection just in there. We can't hear you at the minute, Caroline. You've gone quiet again.
Oh, she's dropped off now.
Yeah, we'll wait for her. I'll try and invite her back in again.
Okay. While you do that, I'll just say, so yeah, I joined again in lockdown, because actually in lockdown I really struggled. I'd given up my job just before lockdown as a pure coincidence to spend some more time with the girls and sort of ground myself and work out where we were going. And we'd moved house, so I needed to unpack as well. And I suddenly went through a bit of an existential crisis and couldn't work out who I was. So joining Way was just amazing. And I realised at that point that there was loads of subgroups, and actually the big group was too big and scary for me, but there wasn't a subgroup for people who were bereaved and had a military link. So I mentioned that, and they said, well, if you want, you can set one up. So I've set up the military subgroup, and I finally feel like within that, because I'd lost a bit of the military. There's so many secondary losses when you lose someone, and I'd lost quite a few of my military contacts, and I really missed that. And there was lots of questions that came up, like pensions, and there's also things that affect people with housing and all sorts of things that are a little bit different. So to be able to talk to like-minded people. How are you getting on with Caroline?
I've just invited her back in. It's saying she's unable to join. So Caroline, I've just sent you another invitation. Hopefully it might work. Okay. Caroline's in rural Wales. I don't know how strong an internet connection she's got. It's a very beautiful part of the world, but a bit like me, so now I live out in the sticks, it can be a bit dodgy. So Caroline, you're back with us. I think, here we go.
Back in the room on a different phone.
Oh wow, backup phone. This is exciting.
Yeah, so I've got a different phone because the other one has just given up the ghost, if you'll pardon me using that term.
Well, thank you so much for coming and joining us this evening. We're super excited that you're here with us. And it's been so wonderful to kind of meet you over the last few weeks as we've been celebrating our 25th anniversary. We actually had an event in Cardiff where we met Caroline and some of our pioneers, we've called them, the original members of the charity that you were supported by. But yeah, we'd love to know all about it, Caroline. You know, what inspired you to set up the charity, and you know, how you became our founder. So I think, why did you start Way 25 years ago? If you could just tell us a bit about you know, why you felt there was a need for this charity and what inspired you.
Of course. Well, sadly, I'd lost my dad when I was 8 in a car accident very suddenly, and that left my mum widowed at the age of 41. My sister was 11 and I was 8, and my mum felt, I recall it vividly, very marginalised. She didn't feel there was any help there for her at all. She did go to a bereavement organisation that had just started then, in fact has become probably the most famous one, Cruise, and they were very sympathetic to mum, obviously, and very...
Oh, Caroline's buffering for me. You seeing the same thing, Emma?
Yeah, it's got a circle of doom going round.
Oh no.
On mine, but I don't know.
Hopefully she'll come back on.
It's quite hard with connections sometimes, isn't it? That phone seemed much better though.
Yeah, definitely. This happened to me when I was doing my intro a couple of weeks ago, and I got the circle on myself, so I knew that I was paused, and I was just sitting there and I was thinking, I don't even know if people can hear me. I'm just going to have a pause where I pause for myself, just to see. We'll just wait for Caroline to join us, because I'd love for everyone to hear it in their own words rather than me kind of giving the background. So I'm just going to try and add her back in again. Let's give it another go. Persevere. We need a lot of perseverance, don't we, I think, as widows?
Yeah, definitely.
Relentless perseverance. Yeah, definitely. We can see you again.
Well, I've no idea. I didn't touch anything, but your circle started just going round and round your face, Kate. So I've no idea what you heard then. Did I say anything?
We heard that you lost your dad, and you were obviously only 11 and 8, you and your sister, and then it paused, I'm afraid.
Oh my goodness, right. So I was talking to nothing. I did wonder when I could see a little circle around your face. So yes, Amanda and I lost my father when we were quite young, and Mum was only 41. And Mum did feel quite marginalised, alone and isolated. I mean, she was pretty much, from my recollection, the only widow in the village, if you like, or in the small town, and there was no such thing as a widowed community back then. So she did seek help a little bit further down the line. It wasn't immediately after my father's death. She did go to a meeting that was run by Cruse, very much in its infancy then. I think they started around about 65 or 66, and my father died in 1969. And Cruse was doing a fantastic job then and still does, but Mum's experience was that they were mainly dealing with widows. There weren't many widowers then going to groups like that, and they were decades older than my mum. So sadly, she came home feeling actually even more deflated because they didn't understand her economical, financial, emotional needs, and how she was trying to juggle her own grief with trying to deal with ours. And of course, I think what people need to remember is death was very much a taboo back then. I found it so gratifying when I was in Cardiff and all the events I've attended with Way over the years, that there's such a healthy atmosphere of talking about everything to do with bereavement, death and loss. That wasn't the case back then. You were literally isolated. It was a conversation stopper. Certainly for me as a child as well, if you mentioned you didn't have a father and he died, people would just walk away from you. So that's what I grew up with, or there would be silly giggling from children, they just didn't know how to deal with it. So that was Mum's situation and my experience, obviously, as a child growing up in that very tight-knit trio, but a very much grieving trio, all grieving individually. As I think I mentioned in Cardiff, the very eminent psychiatrist Colin Murray Parks has said that family are often too involved to help one another. You've got your own agenda, and I think whether you have children or not, even if you have a mother or a father or an aunt who wants to support you, they're also grieving your partner or spouse that you've lost. So it's a very difficult thing, and I did feel I didn't have the vocabulary then. I lacked that as an 8-year-old, and grief vocabulary is still hard to source even when you're an adult. But I did feel like that we were all eating a different meal at the same table. So that stayed with me as I grew up. I was very badly affected through my teenage years, watching how Mum struggled. She didn't manage to meet anybody else. And in fact, she always said, and I will never forget this, that in fact, she would never find anybody else like my father. And I know that's something that other you've also expressed and experienced, and she would just say quietly as she got older that nobody would hold a candle to him, which was lovely and showed utter devotion, but it did mean that she was on her own. Then as we grew up, my sister and I left home. Mum did a fantastic job. We both went off to university. We both got very good jobs, funny enough, both in the media, and life was not bad. Mum was living really vicariously, I think, through us and our joys and experiences. Even though she had a full-time job, she was a deputy head. She was, quite eminent in her field. She was the first female deputy head in the whole of this county. So she did lead the field. She was quite a pioneer in her own way, interviewed amongst a load of men, and she did get the job. But things were pretty much okay. My sister and I had both met our partners relatively young. In fact, my sister was 13 when she met her future husband.
Oh,
wow.
And I was 17, and we were quite a tight-knit quartet. We used to go out together to the pub. We used to go to each other's houses. We both had our own homes by our early 30s. And things were okay. Things were all right. And then, which is why I always say that this anniversary has hit me particularly hard this year, this 25th anniversary of Way. Those numbers, 25, will just do something to me every time I hear them. But 25 years, almost to the month after we lost my dad. We lost him December 1969. And in January 1994, the end of January, my sister arrived home from work to find that her husband had already died. And it was literally like history repeating itself. My sister was 12 weeks pregnant with her first and only child. She has just Peter. I shouldn't say just, he's wonderful, but she didn't go on to have another child. So she arrived home and Charlie sadly had already died. My mum was banging at our front door, which I'll never forget, this terrible thumping. And she and I and my partner, then we weren't married, we basically went through every red light on the way over to my sister, who lives half an hour away from me. Luckily not 10 hours, but still not around the corner. And we arrived there obviously too late. You know, my sister was too late. My brother-in-law had already died. They'd only got married the year before, and as I say, she was just very newly pregnant, and in fact at the most difficult stage of her pregnancy. 12 weeks is actually quite a difficult time. And as we sat, my sister and I sat with Charlie, waiting for the inevitable to happen, for him to be taken away. My sister looked at me and we were looking at Charlie, and she said, "This time we'll do it a different way." And implicitly, I knew that she meant by that we were going to try and talk about it more. This is not, I'm not blaming my mother for this. This is the era in which we grew up. I must stress that. And my mum was amazing. But we knew, having lived 25 years since Dad's death, that we wanted it to be better, and certainly I wanted it to be a better situation for my sister. I didn't want her to be marginalised, ostracised, looked at very strangely if she went to do's where there were couples, and let's face it, that's mostly where she was going and where my mum went in the aftermath of my father's death, because that was been her life before. So that stuck with me. I was Amanda's birth partner. As I say, she was only 12 weeks pregnant, so our main concern as a family was to get her through the pregnancy. So I went to all her antenatal appointments and stayed with her 2, 3, sometimes 4 nights a week, and tried to carry on working. But in the back of my mind, this little voice kept saying, there's got to be something out there. So I got a big, I'm horrified to say it was a big black book. I wish it had been blue. I wish I could say it had been a blue book, given what the waves colours are. But back then it was a big, you know, those A4 books, the big black ones. And I got one of those, I bought one, and I sat down, those days telephone, no social media. And I thought, right, I'm going to find something for my sister. There must be something now, 25 years later. And 100 phone calls later, I mean, I've still got the book logged, no cross behind it, nothing. And the only people that I recall saying that they could help my sister in some way was an organisation, I can't remember which one it was, who said that, yes, oh, of course, they could help my sister. They would send somebody round to see her that evening. And I said, do you mind my asking who's it going to be? Is it a counsellor? Who are you going to send round? And they said, oh, well, there's a lady about 5 minutes away from your sister who's just been widowed. And I said, oh, well, you know, she'll understand, won't she? And they said, oh, she's 86. Now, again, I felt desperate for this poor lady who just lost her husband, but instantly knew that that wasn't what my sister needed. She needed somebody young to understand what devastation had just occurred. So having made my 100 phone calls, I then started any time I could in the evening, if I wasn't with Amanda, and going to antenatal appointments, just fiddling around with a pen and thinking of things and scribbling. And as I said at the Cardiff do, I had a little bit of form in starting things, because prior to that, probably 8 years before Amanda lost Charlie, I'd started a chocolate lovers group. It was the first one in the country, actually. There'd been many since then. But I started something called Chocoholics Unanimous, not anonymous. I wanted us to stand up and be proud, so we were unanimous. And it was very successful. It lasted for quite a number of years, where we would go to chocolate factories and fill our faces and do all sorts of wonderful things, like jacket potato with a bar of chocolate in the middle, which I can highly recommend if you're feeling a bit low. It still works. I still have it now. It's lovely. It's a bit like a crepe. if you're in a hurry and you fancy some chocolate but you want to feel good, get a jacket potato and fill it with
I
chocolate.
love how we're getting recipes at the same time.
Yeah,
This is
so,
magical.
well, it's good for the soul, Kate. It's good
It
for the
is
soul.
good.
So,
And chocolate is a
I,
staple for
of
our
course it
community.
is. Of course it is. So I had a little bit of experience in setting something up nationally. So I started to play with this idea, and so it went on. I would just scribble ideas down, and then I got married. Fast forward through this, I got married in 1995. My sister was my maid of honour, and little Peter, Charles Peter, was born in the August of the year that Charlie died. He was born August 94. He was my page boy, aged 9 months, in a little blue suit that he's never forgiven us for, a blue silk suit. And I realised then also at my wedding that it made Mandy's loss even more acute, obviously. I mean, it was a very difficult time for her, I think, but she was amazing. So I decided there and then that I wanted to set something up. Obviously, life went on. I became pregnant. I had my first child in June 1996, and it was in September 96 that we took her away to a cottage in Devon just for a weekend break. She was a delightful baby, but she was very colicky, so she did cry virtually 24 hours a day. And we thought, let's take her somewhere else for some different air and see if it worked, which it didn't. And whilst we were there, I dispatched my husband to get me a whole array of newspapers. It's the journalist in me. He brought back this big pile. And in the pile, I said, get me something serious and get me something light that I can pick up whilst I'm breastfeeding. And he bought me the Mail on Sunday, and in their You magazine, as I was flicking through, I spotted something called a Fresh Start bursary, and they were basically advertising a scheme for people who wanted to change their lives, to do something dramatically different. And it was like a huge light bulb going off. And I probably almost dropped Madeline because I just shrieked, oh my goodness. My husband came running in and said, what's the matter? And I said, right, you know, I know we're not leaving for 2 days, but I've got this thing, I'm going to do this thing I've been talking about. And then thanks to something unfortunate in the cutlery drawer, which I won't go into detail about, I found something unpleasant in the cutlery drawer. We did in fact leave that night with me completely fired up. I was actually doing this plan in my head. And we came back to Porthcawl, and I stayed up all night with my daughter in her car seat, feeding her, just rocking her. And I, on my ancient computer, typed out a business plan and sent it off. And luckily, I think they had 1,400 applicants, and they interviewed 7, and I was one of the 7 they interviewed in London. I had to go to an interview in London. Obviously had to take my daughter, and she posseted down my beautiful silk jacket just before I went into the interview. So there was this big line of baby posset down the front. But it seemed to work, that and my business plan. The only thing that was quite alarming there was they also asked me whether I was setting up a dating agency. I did get a real grilling, but I managed to say no, and I've still got the business plan. I did show it in Cardiff, that it was to be a peer-to-peer support group run by young widowed men and women for young widowed men and women. And I then utilised my contacts in the press shamelessly. I just found, actually, I found my business plan before I went to Cardiff, but I was just going through all my old documents and found January 97 press, and luckily they're all ticked. I was so pleased with myself. Woman's Hour, Kilroy, he was quite a big name.
Oh yeah, I remember him.
Got Independent, Debbie Thrower, Radio 2, Real Radio, GWR, This Morning, Western Mail, The Echo, The Times, The Sunday Guide, you know, ticked all these and managed to get them to come on board. But it was a challenge in those days, Kate.
It must have been incredibly difficult. I mean, we're talking about the days before the internet and emails, and, you know, how did you manage it? How did you manage? I can't, you know, it's hard for me to even think about setting anything up without having that at my fingertips.
Yes, well, yeah, you're absolutely right to point that out. It was a completely different world. There was no email. I mean, imagine that. Couldn't even, you know, had to go on the blower. And luckily I love the telephone. I'm still a fan of the telephone. Because I prefer it to messaging, because you can hear how people are feeling. I know you can do Zoom and Skype, but I also like the telephone. I think it's because I worked in radio for so long. So I would literally start by cold calling all the supermarkets locally. And then I'd have to, I designed the first logo and the leaflet, obviously, which I showed in Cardiff. That was our first logo, designed in conjunction with a trusted friend who happened to be a graphic designer. So that was brilliant. He came on board and we discussed that, and I'll talk about the logo in a minute. But it was a case of just literally cold calling people and then sending out leaflets, faxing things. You know, there was a thing called a fax machine where you fed, it was like the old laundry where you used to wind, my grandmother had one of these things where you wound the clothes through it to squeeze out the moisture. Well, because you're probably too young, you two, you had to feed your paper
they did have a fax machine in my first job, but I remember I didn't know how to use it, so they had to show me.
I loved it, and I used to think there was a little man in there doing this, but you fed it into the fax machine, then it would beep if you knew it had got to the other end. But you know, you just had to trust, you had to be very trusting. And then if you didn't hear anything, you'd think, oh, they haven't got it, so you'd send it again, and then another fax would come through. It's a bit like loo roll coming out, you know, loads of paper all over the floor. So I would fax lots of people, and then I also walked around in the early days on foot. I would, obviously, I got a very small grant, I missed that bit, from the You magazine, in conjunction with a makeup company, R-O-C. I think they still exist.
Yeah, I think they do.
I do feel we should go back to them at some stage, but I think they gave some sponsorship. So I was acutely aware, because they'd budgeted for me to give up work for 3 to 4 months, which was absolutely hilarious when I look back on it, because all the documents I've got, I was still working away 2 years down the line, even when I was pregnant with my second child, who was born in 1998. So in order to cut the costs down, obviously I would drive to the key cities. In the early days, it was obviously being set up in Wales to start with, so I'd do a day in Cardiff, a day in Swansea, and then it was legwork. I would just make my legs go, and I would walk a radius of 10, 12 miles, pushing leaflets in to surgeries, to supermarkets, to health centres. I contacted the local Spar supermarket and agreed for them to put loads of leaflets on their delivery lorry, so they took them around all the Spars in Wales. So it was a logistical, I wouldn't say it was a nightmare, because that's all I knew. I didn't have another blueprint for this, and having done Chocoholics Unanimous, I obviously utilised the press. And then before we knew it, we had the first meeting. I organised the first meeting, got the press on board to publicise it. And the first meeting was held in Cardiff, February the 26th, 1997. So that's where we were a couple of weeks ago. Or to the day, really, February the 26th, 2022. And I took a lady, actually, from Porthcawl, who had contacted me, and she had been widowed very recently. She had 3 small children, and she asked if I would take her. So she came with me in the car, and my sister came, and we arrived there not knowing what we were going to find or what to expect. And slowly people started coming in. The hotel gave me the room for nothing, tea and coffee, they were very good, and we just sat and waited, and soon there were 10, then there were 15, then there were 20, and suddenly 21. And I think at the last head count, this is all a bit vague, that the pioneers and I, because there was only one a pioneer at the meeting in Cardiff 2 weeks ago. She was the only one who was at the first meeting. The others came on board later. And Kath agreed with me when we were chatting. She thought it was 30 to 35 people in the room. Which is not bad for a first meeting, which had been done by, you know, pushing things through people's doors. And it was a very, very emotionally charged meeting. I can feel it now. There were tears. There were some to leave the room. It was quite difficult to negotiate, but I just explained what I felt was needed and what I wanted to do, and everybody listened. The people who left came back. Nobody left and didn't come back, but they were just very emotional. And in fact, the lady I mentioned, she had been widowed very recently. So I think perhaps it was a little soon, maybe, for her to come to a meeting, but she did stay. She stuck it out, and she remained one of the most staunch members of Way. So I'm very glad that she did stay. And there was one woman at the front of the meeting just sitting quietly with a piece of paper and notepad, and I left and thanked everybody, drove back to Porthcawl, 30 miles, thinking, oh, what have I done? You know, what have I taken on? Is this the right thing? And then I think it was 2 days later, I got a letter. Well, actually, it was just a note with 3 words on it saying, you need help, which everybody who knows me would laugh about now, thinking, you sure that meant about Way? But it was, you need help, and that was Maggie, who was Maggie Libby then, and Maggie came on board, and we worked together as a really good team, and eventually we got all the pioneers together from, you know, mainly South Wales then. We used to meet in Test because it was a central point for us. Oh, are you going again, Kate?
Yeah, you're back again though. We can see you, don't worry. You went momentarily.
Yeah, so anyway, we met in Tesco, and that's where we came up with the blueprint for the Constitution moving forward, Kate. That's where it was born, really, in Tesco's, with our cup of tea that we made last for 3 hours. So that's how
It's an amazing, yeah, it's an amazing story. Thank you, Caroline, for sharing it with us. I've just seen some of the comments coming up and people saying, you know, what an inspiring, amazing story. And I know that many people within the charity have been kind of really wanting to understand and find out, you know, how you set it up and how it was even possible, you know, because naively we're kind of like, how, you know, you just put flyers up, people turned up. But I think what you were saying about the emotion that people felt when they turned up, you know, certainly for me, my very first meeting people who had been through something similar to me and knew what it felt like, and I didn't have to, you know, explain the elephant in the room, which was that, you know, my husband was dead.
Absolutely.
Was just so powerful, and you know, really made me feel at ease straight away, even with people I'd never met before.
Well, that's right. And I think looking back on that first meeting, that was something that people did say moving forward, that it was the first time where they'd been somewhere where they didn't have to explain.
Yeah.
And of course, for me, as the whole trajectory has been for me and my family, you know, we were a very small family, and sadly we're even smaller now because I lost my mum 4 years ago. But I think we were very much aware that that is exactly what Mum had lacked, you know, hearing this from people. Oh, you know what I mean? Even if I just look at you and I say I've had a bad day, you will get it, quite simply. You know, things were unspoken. It was just a look or an arm. And, you know, my mum didn't have that. So it's still a bittersweet memory for me, because although I'm tremendously pleased and, you know, thrilled that there is now help for people, it also exacerbates and highlights the memory of that deficit for my mother, because she literally the lone widow, basically, and nobody was there for her, and nobody did understand. So desperately sad, really, but positive, because we were able to change it, Kate.
Yeah.
It is absolutely brilliant.
Emma, I'm just going to check in on you. We've lost your picture.
Oh yes.
You've gone on pause, I think.
My phone's running out of battery. I'm just going to plug it. I'm just plugging it in.
Don't you worry, you get plugged in.
The benefits of having slightly older children is that one of them's just brought me my phone charger.
Oh, so perfect.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic.
Teamwork.
Teamwork. I'll ask you the next question, then I was going to pass it to Emma, but I guess, as well as, you know, having the difficulty, you didn't have email and internet and social media, etc. You know, what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced when you set up the charity?
Well, apart from the things we've mentioned, as you say, not having social media or that instant communication that is just so brilliant today, you know, in all walks of life, be it personal or business or on a charity level. There were other challenges, Kate. firstly, I think persuading the press, and I am quite persuasive, but sometimes persuading the press that this was necessary, because they would sometimes turn around and say, well, oh, but you know, there's an organisation, and obviously they would mention Cruise, and there is something already, why are you doing this? And then they come back to the old dating agency chestnut. So that was quite an uphill battle, trying to persuade some of the press members that there were specific age-related issues to do with young widowhood, the things that I mentioned perhaps at the beginning of this interview. Things that were practical about, you know, a life ahead of you that's been, you know, natural order completely upended. You didn't expect this to happen. So that was a bit of a battle, and also trying to do that whilst not in any way belittling the loss of older people who are also have the right to grieve. They just face different issues. So that was quite a tough thing. The other thing that was really difficult, and we've continued, I think, to work hard at this, in the early days, men were not coming forward, and there's always been that disparity between the figures for young widowed men and women, and I know that there are still more young widowed women than men. That's remained today. Poor chaps seem to there seems to be a greater death rate amongst men, but we obviously wanted to attract the men who were suffering, and so we would try and target areas. If a man came to a meeting, we would dispatch him, you know, to church halls or whatever, if they had those links, or again to any organisation locally in their area where they could spread the message and say, this isn't just for women. I think in those days, particularly, if you said the word widow was still not used very well, I don't think. People still just say widow. And there was the assumption that this was going to be a group just for women. So I had to work really hard. And when Andy came on board, the very first man we had at our London meeting, way, you know, the first London meeting, and this man came up to me at the end, you know, I was hugging him, hello. And we were all so thrilled that we had a man on board. And by goodness, what a man he turned out to be, because he became Wayne's first chairman. That's Andy Cripps. And he was just brilliant, and he worked quite hard with Maggie Libby. Maggie became Way's first secretary and Andy became the first chair, and they worked very hard at all sorts of things, getting a constitution through, and also trying to, I can't say attract more men, but to make the public and others aware that this was an organisation for men and women. So I think that was the other challenge. And personally, I think I might have mentioned this very briefly in Cardiff, but for me personally, it was also, oh, I think Emma's gone again.
Yeah, I'm just adding it back in.
Okay.
It's good there's three of us, so we can keep taking it in turns.
That's quite good. I think personally, Kate, for me, the challenge was also that I was trying to do this whilst breastfeeding, and then subsequently, as the first year developed, I then became pregnant with my second child, which was very fortunate. So I was trying to do all this with a very small child and then being pregnant again. So I think my fatigue levels were pretty great. I'm not moaning about it. I would do it again tomorrow. But I just think, as well as all those sort of social challenges and the challenges of perception, it was probably quite a difficult thing. And my sister's never said this until we were in Cardiff, and she wrote a piece for the commemorative brochure that you've probably seen. And, you know, she'd never actually said that before. She said, I just can't believe you did carry on doing it with... but I was so angry, Kate, you know, people, and they did ask me about this in the interview in London. They said, oh, you know, a little bit shirty. They said, oh, you're very angry. And I said, yes, I am angry. I'm furious that there is nothing. This isn't right. It's an injustice. And, you know, as the years have rolled on, I mentioned this in Cardiff, I called it Bangor, not like the North Walian city, but Bangor meaning beneficial anger. And anger, if it's channeled correctly, can be the most constructive emotion. And it was for me. I just would go to bed at night thinking, oh, they still haven't got anything in Birmingham. Right, that's going to be this week. Oh, right, Manchester next week. And, you know, I couldn't rest until I'd sent Maggie to all corners of the UK, because her husband, whom she sadly lost, had worked for British Rail, and he and the family, you get, I don't know if it's the same anymore with National Rail, but your employees get free rail travel for life. So we went.
I think it is. We've got we have a trustee who works for the rail network.
You
yeah,
do.
we do.
Yes,
Yeah.
I know who that is, because she laughed about it when I told her. So we sent Maggie off quite gaily, thinking, hooray, there's more in the budget now because we don't have to pay for a train fare. So I would stick and do the stuff locally in Cardiff and Swansea, and then we dispatch Maggie off, and she'd come back like a war reporter telling us what she found and what she could do. And perhaps that's not the correct analogy, war reporter, but she'd come back as a reporter, just feeding back, and then we'd sit down again and say, right, this is what we need to do the next city. So that's really how it started to mushroom. And
yeah. I mean, it's incredible what you've achieved. It's really incredible. Emma, I know you've got some questions as well, so I'm going to let you have a turn.
Oh, rest your voice, bless you. I just think it's all just so inspirational. Your persistence. I mean, how you managed to do this in an era before emails and the internet is just absolutely incredible. I know that you mentioned it in Cardiff, but there was only, because of COVID, a small number of people there. But would you mind reminding us why you chose the swan logo, and also about the significance of the colour blue, because they're still very much present. I mean, I've got the new logo on my top, but you know, it's very much still present today, and it's lovely for people to know why the swan and why blue.
Of course, I feel ashamed, girls, actually, that I haven't put anything blue on tonight, so I'll just hold this.
Oh, I love that.
I'll hold it up again. But yes, I mean, it's a very, oh, look, hold on. Blue glasses, how's that? There's some very blue there. I can't see you that well because these are from the pound shop and those are my other ones, so you'll have to bear with me. But yes, why blue? Well, I just felt really strongly, Emma, when I was doing the literature and, you know, the whole business plan was starting to gel. And I sat down with this friend that I had approached about doing a logo for us. And in the many meetings we had, it just became more and more obvious to me that it just there shouldn't be any black, really. And that's included the print in the early days, which is quite difficult because blueprint doesn't always show up very clearly. But for me, blue was a colour of calm. You know, I live by the sea, so I suppose that was also, you know, the elements. I feel very attached to the sea, and on a lovely day, we haven't had too many of those lately, but they'll come. You know, when the sea is blue and twinkling like diamonds on the surface, it's just very, very calming. And my mum said that all her life, and my mum's favourite colour was pale blue, and she'd say, just look at the sea and it can wash away even sometimes when your grief is intense, just look at the sea, you know, it's bigger than us. So that was in my mind, that the colour blue was somehow calming. And I think if you go to colour therapy, they tell you something similar. You know, red is an angry colour, isn't it?
Sorry about my painted walls.
Yes. But yes, you're a
I didn't do it, don't worry. I moved in when it looked like this.
Well, but you're a great combination tonight, Kate, because you've got that banger and you're in blue, so it's lovely. So yes, blue was calming, I think. I think I toyed with the idea of yellow at some stage, but that just kept making me think of custard. So I thought, no, we can't have yellow, even though it's sunny. But blue just seemed the right thing. And then when this friend sort of went away and we talked, and he came back and said, right, what about this, you know, the swan idea, which I can't remember if that was an embryonic thing. I really can't say. I'm going to give him the credit. I'll say his was the swan. I can't remember. But we got to the swan and both were saying, this is perfect, because the swan is very calm on the surface, particularly if it's a nice calm blue lake or a pond, and underneath they are paddling like bilio to try and stay afloat. And the other thing that I forgot to mention in Cardiff that I liked about the swan logo is, you know, you've got a mute swan, that's a breed of swan. And I remember thinking about that in the early days as well, thinking, well, you know, for my mum, certainly, I think she felt quite voiceless back then. You know, there wasn't anybody to listen to her and what she was going through. And I felt that that very much captured that sense of not having a voice and, you know, being the lone voice in a world that was largely then full of couples, and also a world that did not embrace the concept of death at all. And it was quite odd because my grandmother, my mum's mum, grew up in an era where you did embrace death. You know, that was the era where the coffin was in the living room for a good week before the funeral. I talked to my grandma about this. Sadly, I lost her actually on my 18th birthday when I was living in Germany, which was terrible. But I had talked to her about this, and she said, "Oh no, we'd have the coffin was in the living room." So I don't quite know what went wrong in this country in between my grandma and my dad.
It's really interesting you say that, because that definitely links into one of the other questions. Someone, just quickly before I pick up on that, someone's also mentioned the point that I think you made in Cardiff, which is one's mate for life, which is quite
absolutely well. Thank you.
But talking about is skipping a few from the order that I was going to ask questions, but it seems topical. But about talking about your grandmother is what do you think how do you think attitudes have changed today towards talking about death and bereavement? Because I totally agree with you. I think there have been some massive changes, and I think actually to understand how it could be done better, we could look back to the past, because this.
Of course, Anne, you're absolutely right. And I hadn't thought about this until just before this interview tonight, thinking about my own family. And I thought, my goodness, you know, there was my grandma talking about the fact that everybody came in and they looked and they, I'm sure, kissed the body. And it was very much an open thing. If there were children, they came in. You know, the body was in the parlour in those days. That's what and there was no question that wouldn't happen. And of course, then it went the other way. And I think the British stiff upper lip took over. That's what I feel. And that's great sometimes, but it's not always great. We need to show our emotions. And as far as today is concerned, then I just, you know, for me, what a relief that there are people talking about death a lot. You know, it's quite prolific. There are books coming out. You know, every week there's another book, and it's great. There are people talking about their own experiences. The press don't shy away from that anymore. And I would like to think that families are also better at talking about grief together. I don't know. I wish I could say that is the case in every family. There's a small portion of me that still believes that perhaps it doesn't happen in every family, for the Colin Murray Parkes reason that I mentioned at the beginning. When you have a lot of close family members grieving the same person, that's very complex, because they have their own needs. And I do think then that it perhaps doesn't always work out. But then they've got help outside, like Way or other organisations. And you know what I'm amazed at, Emma, and this does relate to your question, when you and the three of us were talking last week or at the weekend, and also in Cardiff, and this has happened over the years when I've gone to Way's AGMs and anniversary. You know, I just go in, I think, wow, there's another subgroup. Wow, there's something else. And there's so much help available for people within Way, let alone the books and the other organisations and interviews on morning television all the time, and phone-ins. You know, to hear that there's a Way group for cats, and I think also you said dog, was just, well, mind-blowing. I thought, my goodness, there wasn't, you know, for my poor mum, there wasn't anything for her. It was just something for everybody, and that's so good, because you're meeting individual needs. And what I like about that is that, as you two will know, and everybody listening will know, there is no blueprint for grief, and every single grief, whatever age, is individual. You know, there are books, and there will continue to be books talking about the stages of grief. it ain't like that for everybody. You don't all go through the stages of grief in the same way. So I think to have these little groups that you've got, and you said they might even be a small pets group, way, you know, to have this thing, well, because you're then catering for people's personalities. And I also think that goes beyond, I know there's now a community, a widowhood community, and that's absolutely brilliant. And I feel that every time I go to Way Dues. But you're not all just defined by your widowhood. You are people. You're all individuals, fabulous individuals with so much to give with your jobs, or if you've got children, looking after them. If you haven't, you've got other interests. You're busy people who have a life as well as, sadly, having been bereaved. And I think with these individual groups in Way, it's just fantastic because you're acknowledging that.
Yeah, and Caroline, that also leads me on beautifully to another question that we had for you, which is how do you feel knowing that Way has grown into this charity that supports more than 14,000 young widowed people across the country, or has done since 1997? I mean, that's just a great, fantastic number.
It's huge, isn't it, Emma? It almost makes me speechless. And I remember when I first heard that statistic, I thought, my goodness, that's a lot of people. It makes me feel enormous relief that, yes, I did have enough passion, stroke anger. And as you rightly said, Emma, and my friends will tell you this, I am the most persistent person if I feel something's not right. So I'm glad I was in that position and that I am who I am to be able to do that. It probably riles people sometimes that I'm so persistent, but that's obviously what was needed then. So I'm glad I was able to do that, but even more glad that whoever came on board, the next chairman, and Andy and Maggie were the right people to drive it forward.
Yeah.
And then moving on, there've been people, including you, who come on board and have just run with this and continue to see that there is a need for an organisation, a charity that caters for young widowed men and women. So it is astounding, Emma. I have been asked, and I was asked again in Cardiff, and it is a question I get asked a lot. And in fact, a friend of mine, I told her I was doing this interview tonight, and she said, "Oh, you must feel so proud, Caroline." And I always have difficulty with that. My close family get very cross with me. My two daughters get furious with me when I say no, I don't feel pride, because they are very proud that I started it. But I just feel this sort of a nod of gratitude that I was able to do it and that other people took it forward. I think to feel pride when it was born of such pain is a very complex emotion. To me, pride, and I know we have pride of Britain, and you do feel pride in things that are set up to help people, but for me it's just still such a bittersweet thing, Emma, that I prefer to use the word gratitude, that I just feel so grateful. Yeah, I feel so grateful. And I tell you who else, I've mentioned my daughters and my husband. I never mention him, but he's done an awful lot for Way over the years, end, full stop. But my dad and Charlie, in whose name this was really started, I can't tell you what, if they were here now, what they would actually be saying. Because my dad was a larger than life character. He was actually quite big. He was a tall man, and he used to do a lot for charity. Just before he died, he bought a coracle with a man locally, and they were going to row this coracle across to France to raise money for charity to build a swimming pool in Porthcawl, because we didn't have one, and you need a swimming pool by the sea. He had that altruistic streak very much. I wish I'd got to know him better, and I couldn't, because I lost him when I was 8. But knowing what I do and what I do remember, and what my mum told me over the years, is that he would have been tremendously proud to think that this had been done. And Charlie, who was in some ways unassuming but also a great character, I can just see him looking at me going, "You've done what?" Or what? So I feel them very much when I'm talking about this. You can tell it still makes me
Yeah.
emotional. I feel that they are somewhere thinking, thank goodness our short, transient lives have resulted in something that's far less ephemeral. That's what I feel.
Definitely. Well, Caroline, all I can say is that, we're incredibly proud of you, and we are absolutely thrilled that you have set up this charity that's benefited, over 14,000 people, including Emma and myself. I know that before my husband died, he was one of the things he was most worried about was leaving me on my own. And actually, I've become part of Way. I met all these people, and that's choking me because, it's made such a big difference to my life. So
It's
a
like a
huge,
family for you.
yeah, a family, yeah. So a huge thank you from me, on behalf of everybody in Way.
Can I just say one more thing?
Of course you can.
I'm sorry, but I do need to mention my sister again. And in fact, she obviously knows I'm doing this evening, and I asked her, what she would like to say. And she again said that she just feels so relieved and a sense of gratefulness and gratitude again that this has now helped so many people. And she repeated what I already mentioned in Cardiff and say time and time again, that she just wishes that it had been there not only for her but for my mum. And she echoes me in saying that Charlie and Dad would have been just completely awed, speechless. But yes, I will allow that word for them, that they would have been very proud as well. And I'm just so thrilled when I see your faces, when I see the faces of people at meetings, and people do come up to me at the end, and I always feel very humbled by that. And I remember Andy, when I first met him, who literally ran down the corridor behind me to say, thanks for getting this going. And I don't need those thanks. The thanks are in seeing that you're all keeping it going and helping people in their absolute hour of need and beyond that. It's just incredible. So I would say thank you as well to everybody, including you, for doing this.
Yeah, thank you to all our volunteers, and I guess here's to the next 25 years of Way,
Yeah, and I better cut back on the chocolate because I need to be here in 25 years, don't I, for the next anniversary.
So thank you so much, Caroline. Thank you so much, Emma, as well, for joining me this evening. Just as a quick reminder to everyone who's listening, if you've missed part of this interview today, it will be on our Instagram videos. I'll upload it after we've finished. We've got loads of exciting interviews lined up over the next few months. Still got a couple of exclusive slots left. So if anyone's got any ideas, please send us a DM. If you're interested in taking part yourself, let us know. And you can tune in again next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Where I'm going to be talking to another of our Way ambassadors, which is Emma Charlesworth, ahead of the National Day of Reflection. And we're going to be remembering those who've died during the pandemic, as Emma sadly lost her husband to COVID in 2020. So we'll be talking about the last 2 years and how that's impacted, and how she feels now about how we're emerging. I'm conscious Instagram's probably going to cut us off as we get to 8 o'clock. So thank you so much. I'm going to say goodbye, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.